my special guest. He is award-winning former TV journalist and writes the nationally syndicated Holy Cow history column, and of course, an author to the author of the book Witness to War, none other than Mr. J. Mark Powell. Welcome, Mr. J. Mark on Book 101 Review. And can you
Hello,
please
Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned in introduction, I'm a former journalist. I've spent most of my career working in news. I worked 17 years at CNN and CNN Headline News in Atlanta as a senior news writer and as a news editor. I did local news before that at TV stations around the country. During the course of my career, I like to say I reported everywhere from the county courthouse to the White House and everywhere in between the state house, church house, courthouse, you name it. If there was a house, I was there. Um, I'm also an author. I've published two novels before this. This is my first non history book. I'm a lifelong student of the Civil War. I fell in love with it at age 9, and it's been my passion. And beginning in 1989, I began collecting original letters written by people during the 1860s. Um, Let me backtrack. Growing up, I was studying the Civil War. I was immersed in it, and I learned so much about it. I wanted to know what it was like to actually experience the Civil War. So I did Civil War reenacting in my college, high school, teenage, early 20s, which was a wonderfully rewarding experience. But that made me want to know the full picture of what it was like for everyday people, men, military, civilian, children, the Union, Confederate, the whole gamut to live through this remarkable moment in American history. And I knew I was a writer since childhood. I loved writing. And I connected to people from the past through their words. And so starting in 1989, I began collecting original letters from the 1860s whenever I could afford one here and there. One day in 2014, I'd acquired a letter that, for some reason, was delivered to the post office. I had to go and sign for it or something. I picked up that letter, and as I was driving home, it occurred to me that the content of this newest letter tied directly to the content of a letter I already had. And I experienced something of an epiphany at that moment. What if I could assemble a collection that told the entire story of the Civil War from Lincoln's election in 1860 until when the guys returned home late in 1865, and the reader could follow the whole arc and sweep of the Civil War as it happened in real time through excerpts from letters. So I began approaching my collection from that perspective, and after 15 years and 550 letters, I completed it. And so that is the book Witness to War is based. That's the collection this book Witness to War is based on. These 500 plus letters, I didn't use all of them in the book, but there are over 500. We like to say 432 witnesses, one amazing story. And they give us the full perspective of what it was like for an everyday person to go through this remarkable moment in American history in real time as it's happening. These are all brand new, previously unpublished letters that no one has ever read before. There are no excerpts from letters from famous people. There are no presidents, famous generals, famous figures. And I intentionally wrote it that way because I wanted to give voice to the everyday people who live through this experience. So that's an overview of me and what the book is about.
And thank you so much for sharing to the world, Mr. Mark. Thank you. With the thousands of Civil War letters in existence, how do you choose these 500? What made a particular letter leap off the page and demand inclusion?
For me, it was what was being written in the letter, did it strike a chord with me? Did it strike an emotional chord? Did it make me feel something? Did I feel touched? Did I feel sad? Did I feel happy? Did I feel impressed? Did I feel offended and outraged? And the answer is all the above. Of course, the first thing the letter needed to do was address an historical moment or historical situation that was going on. But then more than that, the second stage I looked at was, again, the content. Does this resonate with people? And this is where my former background as a journalist came in handy, because as a journalist, you're listening when you're conducting interviews to what the person is saying, and you're trying to capture the quote, the sound that accurately and succinctly and sometimes movingly sums up what the person is trying to say. And so that's the approach I took when examining these letters. Another thing to consider, Daniel, there have been books for years published of letters, uh, many books, Civil War letters between husband and wives, between people and famous figures, between people inside different regiments or brigades. Those books publish the entire letter. And that's valuable from a historical perspective, and that's good to know. However, let's face it, most of the letter is not of interest to us. Hey, how's everyone back home? How's the crops? How's Ma? Then it's like, oh, we were just in a big battle, or oh, I saw President Lincoln or Robert E. Lee today, or oh, this is going on. And then they go back to mundane, or if it's husband and wife, they profess their love. For our purposes, to learn what the experience was like, I essentially scraped away all that and just used the excerpt from the letter that is germane to what the issue or battle or campaign at hand is. That keeps the story moving. That keeps it a fast pace. That gives you what you want without all that extra stuff to bog it down. I like to call this, Daniel, a history book for people who don't like history. A lot of times people tell me, I didn't like history when I was in school. And I say, I can't say that I blame you, because in school they typically, and not to slur all history teachers, but as a general rule, they typically suck all the life out of it. And it's just a bunch of dead people and names and dates and facts that don't mean anything. But when you put the people back into it and bring them back to life through their own words, as you're reading these excerpts, all of a sudden these are living, breathing people. And people are telling me, readers are telling me over and over, I can relate to them. So the appeal of this book is twofold. First of all, to the person who says, I'm not a true history nut, I'm not a history buff, I'm not a Civil War nut, but I'd like to know more what happened. I'm interested in the period. This makes history accessible to them in a way that they can easily relate to and enjoy. Also, at the same time, to the serious Civil War buff, to the serious Civil War student who knows the history going into it, they're going to see rich details and glimpses into personal lives that they're going to find very fulfilling and rewarding.
Very well said. Very well said. Mr. J. Mark, you included voices from both sides, all regions, men and women, even children. Was there a point in your research where you realized a
Mhm.
particular voice was missing, and how you did you have to hunt to find it?
Well, that's an interesting story, Daniel, because it was the darndest thing. As I was building this collection, I would sometimes have stray thoughts that would just pop into my mind in the middle of the day, apropos of nothing. I remember once distinctly, I was at an ATM withdrawing some money, running some errands around town, as we all do. And as I was at the machine entering my code, it popped into my head, almost like a voice in my head saying, "You need a letter from a slave, from an enslaved person." And I remember actually laughing out loud, because letters from documented slaves at the time are rarer than angel sightings. And there's a reason for that, because under state laws in the southern states where slavery existed, enslaved people were not allowed to learn how to read or write. So consequently, there's not a lot of material from them in their own handwriting in the war years as it's going on. There's a lot of stuff later on as after they're freed and they're learning to read and write. But at that time, I thought, well, that's ridiculous. And about 2 weeks later, out of the blue, boom, one popped up on eBay, and I was able to secure that. It cost an arm and a leg, but for the purpose of the collection, it was worth having. That's an interesting letter. It's in the book, by the way. Slave owners could rent the services of their slaves to other people who wanted to use their labor for a fee. And a woman named Eleanor Halleary in Maryland rents the services of a 23-year-old man, Isaac Hamilton, inside the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C., he and three other slaves. In April 1862, Congress passed the Compensated Emancipation Act for the District of Columbia, the only time in American history where the U.S. government actually paid to purchase slaves. And that bill said we will pay the owner $300. They have to prove they're loyal to the Union, and then these slaves are free. Well, Isaac Hamilton is working in the District of Columbia when this is passed and signed into law and becomes effective on April 7th, 1862. And by the way, to this very day, April 17th is a city holiday in Washington, D.C. called Emancipation Day. A lot of people don't realize that, but it still is. With tax day being April 15th, sometimes if it falls on the weekend, they push the date back to the 17th. And once in a blue moon, April 17th falls on Emancipation Day, so they push it back to the 18th. But anyway, Isaac Hamilton, this 23-year-old slave, writes to his owner saying, hey, and relatively quickly, I want to go to New York City, and I'd like to have my emancipation papers. Please send them
Hmm.
to me.
Certainly. And
It's an
Mr.
amazing letter to have. I remember another time I was doing yard work, not even in my head, oh, I need a letter from a nurse. And boom, there was about 2 weeks later, up came a magnificent letter from a nurse in a hospital in Washington, D.C. in summertime talking about the conditions. And this is not at the battlefield, Daniel. This is a hospital where they've removed them back behind to Washington, D.C. And she talks about it. I don't mean to be graphic, but again, the purpose of this book is to expose what it was really like. And she talks about the men, their bodies are covered with flies because they've got the windows open and the flies are all drawn to them. And she said they're too exhausted to shoo them off. And I mean, she just really gives a graphic description of what that was like. So, yes, those are some of the experiences I've had.
Well, very well said, Mr. J. Mark. As a journalist and former CNN editor, you've trained to select most compelling stories from overwhelming information. Did you or did your newsroom instincts help you to curate these letters?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because as a journalist, you're trained to say, what's going on? Let's get to the heart of the issue. That's the approach I brought to history. Now, the difference between journalism and history, in both cases, you're reporting on what happened. In journalism, you're reporting on it as it's happening, generally. The historian is reporting on what has happened, what happened in the past. So, in both cases, you're trying to get to the heart of what's really at stake, what's going on here, what is the most important key element of this that readers need to know, and the significance of it. And so that's the approach I took in looking at these letters and conveying the essence of what was happening in the 1860s in the moment. And by the way, I should point out, Daniel, too, these letters are all real time as events are happening. There are no memoirs used from that were written decades later in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, early 1900s even. These are all at the time. Sometimes they're written the day things are happening. There's a wonderful letter, well, wonderful, but there's a poignant letter in the book where a young Union officer, a second lieutenant, is writing to his wife during the Battle of Nashville in Tennessee in December 1864. He's describing the battle to her while it's underway as it's happening. And I mean, it puts you in the moment when you read this letter. The letter abruptly stops, and he's killed in the battle 30 minutes later. I mean, you can't get more involved than that. I have read 20 to 25,000 original Civil War letters. I've never even encountered, or even heard of one where the soldier describes the battle he is killed in as it's actually being fought.
Interesting story, Mr. J. Mark. Some letters are heartbreaking, some mundane, some raw with anger or longing. Was there a letter you almost left out because of felt too private, too painful, like you were reading something never meant for strangers' eyes?
That is a very good question, Daniel. There are not any that I left almost left out, but there are many I felt very guilty about. There's one particular letter where a Union soldier, young Union soldier in Illinois, has just gotten married, and I mean, like the day after his marriage, he enlists, and like a week or 10 days later, he moves off. Boom, he's gone, and he's writing to his wife and back home very shortly afterwards, and he said, I heard you were sick, and I'm sorry to hear you're not feeling well. And I also heard you've been telling people that you feel like you were treed, meaning like when you're hunting, you tree a squirrel or tree a raccoon, and you've got them. And he said, I was very sorry to hear that. And then he says, but if you think you're in a bad way, if there's a way you can get rid of it without damaging your health, I think you should do that. Well, that's abortion. He's talking about her having an abortion, which tends to suggest that they got married under less than ideal circumstances. They had to get married, to use old terminology. He goes on at the bottom of that letter to say, please burn this letter. Please burn this letter, which she did not do. So yeah, you're literally peeking over their shoulder as they're writing, because they never had any idea that anyone would ever be reading these letters, and they're pouring their hearts out, and they're open and honest and vulnerable, and that's why we can relate to them as people. These aren't figures from the past. These are people just like you and me who just happen to be born earlier. That's all. And then that makes the reader wonder, gee, what would I do in that circumstance? How would I handle that? But again, this is as close as we have. They're telling us, they are revisiting the moment. This is as close as we can get to actually asking these people, what was it really like? What was it like to live through the Civil War? And as you indicated, Daniel, they never thought these letters would be published. Meaning, when I get to heaven and I pass through the pearly gates, there's going to be 432 people standing on the other side with their arms folded across their chest saying, we've been waiting to have a word with you, mister, for publishing their letters.
Certainly. Yes. So, Mr. J. Mark, once a soldier writes about being under the enemy's fire for 7 days, fighting through burning woods, another pleads, "Oh, Joe doesn't come home in same collection. Where are the battle chaos and domestic longing? What does it do to a reader, to you as editor, and to hold these impossibly different experiences of the same war in the same hands?"
Yeah, it's when you hold the actual letters, uh, you're actually holding history in your hand. And many times I remind myself, this piece of paper that I'm holding with this writing on it, this actual letter was really in a Civil War Army camp in the 1860s. It's in my hand right now in 2026. This piece of paper is a time machine because it was really there when it was really happening, and it's really here right now as we're studying about it. Again, these accounts, these heartfelt, uh, no hold bars, put you in the moment accounts, really transport the reader to that time and place in a way nothing else can. History books tell you what happened. This happened on this date, this battle was fought, blah, blah, blah. Witness to War tells you, it puts you in the moment and tells you what it was like to experience it as a real person.
Interesting. Mr. J. Mark, you have voices dismissing secession, voice demanding it, a voice exhausted politics altogether. People about here talk about of nothing now but pork in politics. Do this letter suggest ordinary Americans understood that was coming, or
Mhm.
we most of them as surprised as we would?
That excerpt you just read, Daniel, was written in very early January 1862 when the country was falling apart in what was called the Secession Crisis. The writer was in Ohio, which is a big pork producer. So he says people talk about pork, nothing but pork and politics. And he goes on to say, but soon pork will all be sold and then it'll be politics, because the nation was going through a divorce. It was splitting up into two sides. And that's another thing that puts you in the moment. A reader recently shared with me reading the 1861 chapter where the country is falling apart is like reading social media today. You'll read a lot of parallels between then and now. That again, you go, oh, I understand in a way a regular history book doesn't convey.
Mm. So, Mr. J. Mark, to wrap up our discussion for today, at the very end of the book, after 500 letters, after all those voices have spoken across 160 years, what do you want the reader to hear in the silence when the last page is turned?
You know, there's a line in a letter that has haunted me ever since I first read it. It was written in August 1865 by a war widow in Iowa, and her husband had gone off to war and had been killed. And it's now, he's been gone almost a year and a half, 2 years, and this woman is still just totally devastated. And she's writing to her brother-in-law, her late husband's brother, and she says, how I felt when the regiment came home without him, I cannot describe. I felt then that I'd lost him forever. And then she says the line that's haunted me for 20 years. She said, now that the cruel war is over and I look back and see all the broken, lonely homes, I wonder, what did it all mean? And through Witness
Mm.
to War, we get the answer to that question from the very people who were living it. They tell us what it meant.
Well, interesting indeed and beautifully crafted, Mr. J. Mark. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your book and, well, other projects that you're doing right now?
Well, right
Mr. J.
now I'm promoting the book far and wide through opportunities like your wonderful podcast. So if someone is interested in it, please you can go to Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Books a Million, Walmart.com. It's in Kindle, it's in print, and please, if you're not interested, you know somebody who's interested in history, share this with them too. Pass this on to them because they're gonna really like it. It's a very fun, readable, enjoyable book.
Definitely, people, let's support Mr. J. Mark Powell because if we support him, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to rise. So, Mr. J. Mark Powell, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Daniel.
Modica people, see you soon.